Fort Parker Massacre, 1836, How Rachel Plummer Survived Comanche Captivity. One minute the field was clear, the next there were more Indians than I had ever dreamed of before the fort. At dawn on May 19, 1836, 17-year-old Rachel Parker Plummer clutched her infant child as hundreds of Comanche warriors descended upon Fort Parker. Within moments, her family was slaughtered, her child torn from her arms, and Rachel herself dragged into 21 months of brutal captivity. How could a young mother survive such unimaginable horror, and what psychological scars would remain even after her physical chains were broken? The moment of terror at Fort Parker. On May 19, 1836, the tranquil morning at Fort Parker transformed into a scene of unprecedented violence. Rachel Parker Plummer, a young mother of just 17, heard the thundering hoofbeats approaching the settlement. The rhythmic drumming of hundreds of horses signaled the arrival of Comanche warriors who would forever alter the course of her life. Fort Parker had been constructed as a sanctuary against frontier dangers. Its imposing 12-foot walls, dual entrance gates, and arrangement of protective cabins represented the settlers' faith in their ability to withstand indigenous attacks. The Parker family, along with other settlers, had established this outpost on the Texas frontier with confidence in its defensive capabilities. The Comanche attack unfolded with military precision. Warriors swarmed the settlement in overwhelming numbers, executing a coordinated assault that neutralized any potential resistance. The settlers, caught unprepared despite living under constant threat, had no time to organize a defense. Some accounts indicate the fort's gates may have been left open that morning, a fatal oversight that facilitated the rapid breach of their protective walls. Rachel later documented the sudden transformation. One minute the field was clear, the next there were more Indians than I had ever dreamed of before the fort. This stark description reveals how settlers consistently underestimated Comanche military capabilities. While European colonists relied on static fortifications, the Comanche had developed highly mobile warfare tactics that rendered traditional defenses obsolete. Their horseback combat skills, refined over generations, gave them tactical advantages that settlers failed to anticipate or counter. For Rachel, the attack's impact was immediate and devastating. Within minutes, she witnessed the killing of family members, including her uncle Benjamin Parker, who had attempted to negotiate with the warriors. The Comanche tore her child from her arms, a trauma that neurological research now identifies as particularly severe due to the disruption of maternal-infant attachment bonds. This separation activated Rachel's fight-or-flight response, while simultaneously inflicting an attachment injury that would complicate her psychological recovery. The attack on Fort Parker stands as a pivotal moment in Texas frontier history, illustrating the clash between two fundamentally different military cultures. The Parker family's reliance on static defenses reflected European warfare traditions unsuited to the North American frontier. Meanwhile, the Comanche raid demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare, creating maximum terror through speed, violence, and the targeted disruption of family bonds. For Rachel Parker Plummer, it marked the beginning of 21 months of captivity that would test the limits of human endurance and resilience. Her experience raises profound questions about survival under extreme conditions and the lasting psychological impact of trauma, questions that her subsequent journey would answer in ways both inspiring and heartbreaking. The massacre and capture. The attack on Fort Parker unfolded with devastating efficiency. Benjamin Parker, Rachel's uncle, stepped outside the fort's walls to negotiate with the Comanche warriors. Despite his peaceful intentions, the warriors surrounded Benjamin and killed him in full view of the horrified settlers. Benjamin's death triggered panic throughout Fort Parker. Rachel clutched her young son tightly against her chest and fled from the fort, her heart racing with fear. She ran desperately toward the woods, hoping to find safety among the trees. But the sound of hoofbeats grew louder behind her. The Comanche warriors, mounted on swift horses, quickly overtook the fleeing mother. A warrior rode alongside Rachel, reaching down from his horse to grab at her child. She twisted away, screaming, but another rider circled around to block her path. "I tried to shield my child," Rachel later recounted, "but the Comanche tore him from my embrace. She lunged for her son as a warrior lifted him away, but strong hands seized her arms, forcing her to the ground. Her child's cries faded as he was passed to another rider who galloped away with him. The warriors bound Rachel's hands and dragged her back toward the fort, now overrun with Comanche fighters. Bodies of settlers lay scattered across the ground. Rachel recognized her neighbors, people she had shared meals with just days before, now motionless in death. The warriors positioned Rachel beside her uncle Benjamin's mutilated body. She turned her face away, but was forced to sit there as the raiders gathered their plunder from the settlement. Other captives were brought to the same area, 5 in total, including Rachel's cousin Cynthia Ann Parker, a 9-year-old girl who sobbed quietly beside her. As the morning progressed, the Comanche prepared to leave Fort Parker. They loaded stolen goods onto horses and organized their captives into a group. Rachel caught one final glimpse of the settlement that had been her home as the warriors forced her to mount a horse. The fort's walls, once symbols of safety, now stood as empty reminders of shattered security. The Comanche band rode away from Fort Parker with their captives, moving at a pace that made conversation impossible. Rachel strained to catch sight of her son among the riders ahead, but could not locate him. As the distance from the fort increased, the reality of her situation settled upon her. She was now a captive of the Comanche, being taken into unknown territory with no prospect of immediate rescue. The arduous journey into Comanche territory. The Comanche band traveled relentlessly westward, driving their captives forward at a punishing pace. Rachel's legs and back ached from hours on horseback, a mode of transportation she had little experience with before her capture. When her mount stumbled on rocky terrain, a warrior struck her with a riding quirt, leaving welts across her shoulders. No allowance was made for her youth or gender. She was expected to keep pace or suffer the consequences. The first night, the group made camp beside a shallow creek. Rachel collapsed to the ground when permitted to dismount, her legs too weak to support her weight. A Comanche woman roughly pulled her up and gestured toward a pile of wood, indicating Rachel should help prepare the evening fire. Despite her exhaustion, Rachel gathered sticks with trembling hands, knowing that refusal might bring worse punishment. "I had not eaten since before the attack," Rachel later wrote in her narrative. The Comanche provided her with a small portion of dried meat that night, tough and unfamiliar in taste. She choked it down, desperate for sustenance. Water came from the creek, scooped up in cupped hands, gritty with sand and tasting of earth. Sleep offered little respite. The captives were bound at night, their ankles secured with rawhide strips that cut into the skin. Rachel lay on the hard ground without blanket or shelter, shivering as the temperature dropped. Nearby, she could hear the muffled sobs of the other captives. Days blurred together as the journey continued. The landscape transformed around them. Rolling hills gave way to open plains, then rugged terrain with sparse vegetation. Each environment presented new challenges. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, burning Rachel's fair skin until it blistered and peeled. When they crossed rivers, she was expected to swim or wade through swift currents, struggling to keep her head above water. One morning, Rachel spotted riders on the horizon and felt a surge of hope, perhaps rescuers from the settlements. The Comanche warriors immediately increased their pace, driving the captives harder until the potential threat disappeared from view. Rachel's brief flare of hope extinguished, replaced by the crushing realization that rescue might never come. The physical toll of the journey mounted daily. Rachel's feet became raw and bleeding from times when she was forced to walk. Her body, already weakened by the ordeal, began to show signs of serious deterioration. Hunger became a constant companion as the meager rations provided barely sustained life. She learned to eat whatever was offered, unfamiliar roots, half-cooked meat, bitter berries, knowing that survival depended on maintaining whatever strength she could. As they moved deeper into Comanche territory, Rachel noticed changes in the warriors' behavior. They relaxed their vigilance somewhat, confident in their distance from settler communities. The captives were still closely guarded, but the immediate threat of death for disobedience seemed to lessen. Rachel observed the interactions between tribal members, beginning to discern the social structure that would determine her place in their world. After weeks of travel, the band approached their destination, a Comanche encampment nestled in a valley. Smoke from cooking fires rose into the air, and the shapes of teepees became visible against the landscape. Children ran out to meet the returning warriors, staring curiously at the captives. Rachel stood exhausted and disoriented at the edge of the camp, her clothes in tatters, her body marked by the journey's hardships. This strange settlement would be her home for the foreseeable future, a thought that filled her with dread and uncertainty. As she was led into the camp, Rachel caught sight of other non-Comanche individuals, evidence that she was not the first captive brought to this place. Their faces showed the marks of months or years in captivity, expressions hardened by experiences she was only beginning to understand. One woman, noticing Rachel's gaze, quickly looked away, unwilling or unable to offer comfort to the newcomer. In that moment, Rachel grasped the full reality of her situation. She stood at the threshold of a new existence, one that would demand everything she had simply to survive. Early days in captivity and culture shock. Rachel's first days in Comanche territory plunged her into profound culture shock. The nomadic lifestyle of her captors stood in stark contrast to the settled agricultural existence she had known at Fort Parker. Where she had lived in permanent wooden structures, the Comanche moved their camps regularly, dismantling and rebuilding their teepees as they followed seasonal hunting patterns. The unfamiliar sights, sounds, and customs surrounding Rachel often filled her with fear. Warriors returned to camp with fresh scalps, displaying them proudly while women cheered. At night, unfamiliar chanting and drumming kept her awake, the rhythms and melodies utterly foreign to her ears. She watched wide-eyed as tribe members performed rituals she couldn't comprehend, their spiritual practices, nothing like the Protestant services of her upbringing. The Comanche social structure confused Rachel. She struggled to understand the complex hierarchy that determined who gave orders and who obeyed. Some women seemed to hold considerable authority, while others were clearly subservient. Warriors displayed status through specific decorations and possessions that held meanings she couldn't decipher. Every interaction seemed governed by unwritten rules that Rachel violated unknowingly, bringing swift punishment. Survival in this hostile environment demanded rapid adaptation. Rachel learned to watch carefully before acting, observing how others behaved, and then mimicking their movements. She noted which areas of the camp were restricted, which people commanded respect, and how daily tasks were performed. This constant vigilance drained her emotionally, but proved essential for avoiding unnecessary conflict. Physical hardships mounted daily. The weather alternated between scorching heat that blistered her fair skin and bitter cold that penetrated the thin hides she was given for protection. Food came irregularly and in unfamiliar forms: raw liver, dried meat so tough it hurt her teeth, strange roots and berries she couldn't identify. Water was often scarce, and she learned to endure thirst for extended periods. The Comanche reputation for harsh treatment of prisoners proved accurate in Rachel's experience. When she failed to complete tasks quickly enough, blows followed. A woman struck her with a stick when she incorrectly prepared a hide. A warrior knocked her to the ground when she walked too near his prized possessions. These physical punishments came without warning or explanation, making it impossible for Rachel to anticipate or avoid them. Rachel's pregnancy, discovered shortly after her capture, only increased her physical burden. Rather than receiving accommodation for her condition, she found herself assigned the most demanding tasks. She was forced to carry heavy loads of firewood, kneel for hours scraping hides, and haul water from distant streams. Each night she collapsed in exhaustion, her body aching and her unborn child stirring within her. The language barrier created perhaps the most isolating aspect of Rachel's captivity. Unable to communicate effectively with her captors, she existed in a world of gestures, facial expressions, and tones of voice. This communication gap left her vulnerable to misunderstandings and unable to express even basic needs. When she fell ill one day, she couldn't explain her symptoms or ask for help, instead suffering silently until the sickness passed. Simple tasks became enormous challenges under these conditions. When instructed to prepare a hide using unfamiliar techniques, Rachel could only guess at the proper method. Her attempts often resulted in failure, bringing ridicule and punishment. When sent to gather specific plants, she couldn't ask clarifying questions about what to look for, resulting in wasted hours and angry responses when she returned with the wrong items. As Rachel struggled to interpret commands and expectations, her linguistic isolation deepened her feelings of alienation and despair. Nights were the worst, when exhaustion should have brought sleep, but instead left her lying awake, unable to process the day's events through conversation or receive comfort from another human being. In these dark hours, memories of her former life and worry for her child's future overwhelmed her, testing the limits of her emotional endurance just as the physical demands tested her body. Resilience and adaptation for survival. After weeks of captivity, something shifted within Rachel. Faced with the harsh choice between adaptation and despair, she chose to fight for her survival. One morning, rather than waiting to be ordered to work, she rose early and began the daily fire-building process she had observed others performing. A Comanche woman paused, watching Rachel arrange the kindling as she had been shown, and gave a slight nod before moving on. This small moment marked the beginning of Rachel's strategic approach to captivity. She began studying her captors with deliberate attention, noting not just what they did, but how they did it. She observed which plants women gathered for medicine, how they prepared different foods, and the techniques they used to craft essential items. When no one was watching, she practiced these skills, determined to master them. Rachel's careful observations extended to social interactions. She noted which warriors held the most respect, how women related to different tribal members, and the subtle indicators of status within the group. She recognized that certain colors of beads carried significance, specific gestures conveyed respect, and particular spaces within the camp were reserved for individuals of importance. This heightened awareness proved invaluable as Rachel navigated the complex social dynamics of Comanche society. When a high-status warrior entered an area, she learned to lower her eyes and step aside. When women gathered for certain tasks, she recognized the hierarchy that determined who spoke first and who remained silent. These insights helped her avoid unnecessary conflict and gradually reduced the frequency of punishment. Rachel's experience paralleled that of other settlers captured by the Comanche. Throughout the frontier, similar stories unfolded as captives faced the initial shock of cultural displacement followed by the fundamental challenge of adaptation. The Comanche were known for harsh treatment of prisoners, but this treatment often served as part of a complex process of cultural assimilation. Those who survived the initial trauma and difficulties might eventually find a place within Comanche society, though the path to acceptance was long and perilous. As weeks turned to months, Rachel's world continued to transform. The initial shock of captivity gave way to grim determination to endure. She learned to efficiently perform assigned tasks, from food preparation to tending the needs of the tribe. When instructed to prepare hides, she now understood the precise scraping technique that produced acceptable results. When sent to gather plants, she could identify the correct varieties and harvest them properly. Each small victory in the daily struggle for survival brought Rachel closer to tenuous acceptance within the Comanche camp. The first time she successfully completed a complex task without supervision, the woman who had frequently struck her for failures instead gave a grunt of approval. When Rachel correctly anticipated the needs of the group during a hasty camp relocation, moving without being told, she received a slightly larger portion of food that evening. One significant breakthrough came when Rachel used her observational skills during a crisis. When a child in the camp fell ill with symptoms she recognized from her past life, Rachel cautiously prepared a remedy using techniques she had seen Comanche women employ with similar plants. The child's recovery earned her a rare moment of acknowledgement from the mother, not friendship, but a recognition of value that slightly elevated Rachel's status. However, even as Rachel adapted to her new reality, the trauma of her capture and loss of her child remained ever present. The psychological impact of these events shaped her interactions with her captors and fellow captives. She maintained an emotional distance, protecting the core of her identity even as she outwardly conformed to Comanche expectations. At night, when others slept, she silently recited prayers and memories from her previous life, preserving connections to what had been taken from her. Trust came slowly, if at all, in an environment where alliances could shift as quickly as the prairie winds. Rachel learned to be cautious with the few other captives she encountered. Some had been with the Comanche for years and had adopted their captors' perspectives and values. Others, more recently taken, might make dangerous mistakes that could bring punishment to anyone associated with them. She observed how long-term captives navigated their position, neither fully accepted as Comanche nor retaining their original identity, and recognized the complex psychological adaptations required for long-term survival. Despite her growing competence in daily tasks, Rachel remained alert to opportunities. She noted which directions the warriors traveled for trading, which settlements they mentioned, and any information that might someday aid in escape or rescue. This constant awareness, maintained alongside her outward compliance, represented Rachel's internal resistance, the part of herself that refused to surrender completely to captivity, even as she adapted to its demands. The continuing tragedy, the loss of a second child. In the months that followed her capture, Rachel became pregnant for the second time. As the time of delivery approached, she experienced a mix of anticipation and dread. The birth should have been a moment of joy, but the harsh reality of her situation loomed heavily over her. The Comanche viewed the newborn not as a blessing, but as a burden that could hinder Rachel's ability to work. When the child was finally born, a girl, Rachel clutched her tightly, overwhelmed by a fierce instinct to protect. But the joy was short-lived. Almost immediately, the warriors decided the infant posed a threat to Rachel's productivity. In a brutal act that Rachel could scarcely comprehend, they took the child from her arms and killed her before her eyes. The loss struck Rachel with a force that shattered her spirit, sending her into an abyss of grief and despair. The memory of that moment would haunt her for the rest of her life. Rachel's heart ached not only for the child she had lost, but also for the life that had been violently uprooted. She had entered a world of unimaginable cruelty, where the very act of motherhood was stripped away, leaving her feeling more isolated than ever. The trauma of losing her second child compounded the emotional scars of her earlier captivity, deepening her resolve to survive, even as she felt the weight of despair pressing down upon her. Despite this unimaginable loss, Rachel forced herself to persevere. The harsh realities of Comanche life demanded continuous labor, and she quickly adapted to her new role within the tribe. Every day brought new challenges, but Rachel's determination became a source of strength. Though her heart was heavy with grief, she focused on the tasks at hand, finding solace in the rhythm of work. As time passed, Rachel's resilience began to earn her a measure of respect among the Comanche. In a culture that valued strength and endurance, her ability to withstand hardship did not go unnoticed. The women who had once scorned her for her failures now acknowledged her determination. Small victories in her daily tasks turned into building blocks of acceptance, allowing her to carve out a place for herself within the tribe. One day, an event of significance unfolded. During a skirmish with a rival group, Rachel found herself in a precarious situation while gathering supplies. A young warrior, pinned down by an enemy's arrow, called out for help. Without thinking, Rachel rushed forward, using her knowledge of the terrain to distract the attackers long enough for the warrior to escape. This act of courage, born from desperation and a fierce will to survive, made a lasting impression on the Comanche warriors who witnessed it. Though the details of that day faded with time, the bravery Rachel displayed marked a turning point in her standing within the tribe. No longer seen merely as a captive, she began to be recognized as someone who could contribute meaningfully, even amidst the chaos of tribal warfare. This shift in perception provided her with a sense of purpose, a reason to endure the relentless days ahead. After 21 months of captivity, Rachel's long ordeal came to an end. The circumstances surrounding her release were unexpected. A trader passing through the region recognized her and negotiated with the Comanche for her freedom. As she left the camp, Rachel felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was finally free, yet the scars of her experience would remain, shaping her forever. Returning to a world that had moved on without her, Rachel faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life. The trauma of losing 2 children and enduring captivity had changed her irrevocably. Yet within her, a flicker of hope remained, a determination to reclaim her identity and find peace amidst the echoes of her past. The release and indelible scars. After a long and harrowing journey, Rachel was sold to a trader who facilitated her return to her family. However, the woman who reunited with her loved ones was not the same Rachel Parker Plummer, who had been taken from Fort Parker nearly 2 years prior. The experiences she endured among the Comanche had profoundly altered her worldview, leaving deep psychological scars that would never fully heal. The trauma of captivity, the loss of her children, and the daily struggle for survival inflicted heavy tolls on her spirit. Rachel's story, like those of many captives, did not conclude with a simple happy ending. The lasting effects of her time with the Comanche would shape the rest of her life. She wrestled with the challenge of readjusting to her former life, while haunted by memories of captivity and the children she had lost. Tragically, Rachel's life after her release was cut short. She passed away in 1839, just a few years after returning from her ordeal. Her death serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring physical and emotional losses born from her harrowing experiences. Her story illuminates a dark chapter of American frontier history, where cultures collided with devastating consequences for individuals caught between worlds. Rachel's suffering transformed her into a symbol of both the human capacity to endure and the lasting wounds that violence leaves behind. Though her voice was silenced too soon, her narrative continues to demand we confront the complex, painful truths of our shared past.